Hello there, and welcome. Well, yesterday I suggested that you set aside time on a regular basis in your classes to allow the students to present questions that are concerning them, regardless of the content area that you teach. And so I wanted to, in this episode, talk about the rules I would use to administer such discussion sessions, and then offer some suggestions about how you can begin the discussion sessions and then allow the students to go on past that. So the first thing I would say is the main rule in my classroom was be polite. So that means that I am the ultimate arbiter of what's polite, but essentially it says to the students, we are going to have the discussion, and since I'm used to administering discussions, students don't necessarily have to put their hands up, but it's up to you as a teacher and up to me as a teacher in the room who speaks next. The second thing is we do not interrupt. The only interrupter is the arbiter. The arbiter can interrupt, but nobody else can interrupt anybody else. When one person is speaking, everybody else listens. The third thing is it's not personal. The discussion can't be personal. That's Cleo the cat. The discussion can't be personal. It's about ideas, it's not about personalities. And so we don't attack each other's personal experiences. We try to deal with them in a way that's respectful and loving. Sorry about the interruption. Yeah. So we respect each other personally, and the teacher is the ultimate arbiter. And finally, when the teacher says, no, we're not going to go that far, the teacher is the absolute authority in that sense. You can only lead a discussion as far as you can lead it. And if students want to get into a subject that you cannot comfortably confront, then you have to accept your limitations and say, no, we're going to stop there. We're going to set that aside for the time being. We'll talk about something else, or you guys can continue this conversation next week, and I'll see if I can figure out a way to direct it that's not going to be unacceptable for the classroom. So that's part of how you can do it. The second thing you can do is you can actually present them with dilemmas. And dilemmas can be actually set to a particular class content. You can deal with the dilemma of Abe Lincoln and how his thinking progressed during the Civil War from that of Union to that of abolition. Or you can present this dilemma. Here's one for you. Let's say that you have two friends that happen to be dating each other, and one night you're at a social gathering and you see one of the friends kissing not your other friend. In other words, cheating. What do you do? Now, that actually takes the limits off things, because students can really get into discussing what they do. Would they talk to the person who cheated? Would they talk to the person who's being cheated on? Would they keep it to themselves and not get involved? Would they side with one friend or another? All of those are important questions, and there's not an easy answer to them, okay? I think dilemmas and paradoxes work better in discussion because the easy answer doesn't necessarily provide opportunities for people to really wrestle with real questions, real struggles. I'll give you another one. Let's say you're in a science class, you're talking about how genetics work. I learned Punnett squares in high school in biology. So it turns out that Henrietta Lacks was this patient who was brain dead, whose tissues were used to make all sorts of discoveries, and some medical innovators decided they wanted to patent certain genes because these genes were protective against disease. Okay. Can you do that? Who do genes belong to? Do your genes belong exclusively to you? Or do they belong to you and your siblings? Or do they belong to your family? Or wait a minute, it gets complicated fast. And that's interesting to talk to students about something like that. That's a real dilemma in science right now. You can present them with mathematical paradoxes, with physical paradoxes. And you may end up discussing things like dress codes, which to students is very important. To adults it's less important. But dress codes actually prepare us for laws that we may not fully think are great ideas. But we may change our ideas about those laws as we progress. The thing is, I remember as a teenager, we got into a discussion in my pre-calc class about gay life, about being gay publicly. And this tells you how old I am, because, and the different kinds of communities I lived in, because there were communities that I lived in where being gay was not necessarily something you hid or thought you could hide. When I was a younger teen, I was in a community where we knew certain people were gay. It was, to us, obvious. And also, not a big deal. And then I moved my senior year, and I moved to a community where being gay was a big deal. And people tried to keep it under wraps. And during this discussion that we had about, we were having it, I believe, about gay marriage. And this was before the Obergefell decision. And I was like, well, if two people want to marry, they have a right to get married. It's not really for the state to say whether or not they should get married. Now, what was interesting was one of the very brilliant people in the room started describing a sort of gay, like a super gay world. I don't know how to put it the way she put it, but she was clearly denigrating it and thinking of it as a dangerous way of living. This was a time before AIDS became an issue. And I think there was a lot of things that changed when AIDS came to be part of our national consciousness. The disease had begun in the world by the time I was in high school, but it had not become the issue that it would become. And it did not present itself during the argument. But I remember thinking that, as this young woman described this gay world, I remember thinking to myself, I was thinking, yeah, but if adults decide they want to act a certain way, how are you going to stop them? What exactly are you going to do to stop them? And I still ask that question of a lot of things. There's this idea that the government can stop private behavior, and people will see me as this kind of liberal thinker, but it's not just liberality on my part, it's practicality. I don't think you can legislate the heart, and I don't think the government should try. I think it's dangerous for the government to try to legislate the human heart, because it simply, I just don't think it works. I don't think that's its position. I think the flow of the heart is something different. And I remember thinking, kind of trying to articulate at the time something that's now become more clear to me, and that is, I'm free to make my own decisions in the sphere of myself. I'm free to make those decisions, and as long as it doesn't impinge on you, fellow citizen, that's my decision, not yours. So I have rights right up into the edge of somebody else's rights. And of course, one of the big topics that might come up would be the issue of abortion. And I sort of had that as a verboten conversation in my room. Now I'm not sure I would. partly because my decisions personally about it and about the issue are grounded in a religious fear, but I think people would be surprised about how I would make that argument. And perhaps someday I'll talk about it. But I think when students wrestle with these very difficult and elemental questions, they do some of their most important thinking and learning. And I think as teachers, we need to honor that as much as we can, and as much as they are capable of achieving it at their stage. They don't have the life experience we have, but they certainly have the stakes that we have, and maybe more so because they're younger and there's more opportunity for them to end up in perfectly impossible problems to unravel. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope I've been of some use in my suggestions, and I hope to see you again, or for you to see me, you gorgeous people.